All right, we'll get started here in just a couple of minutes. Get some people logged in. My name is Greg Ondo. I work with Yamaha Corporation of America, and I work as a Steinberg specialist in the U.S. We'll get started here in just a couple minutes. I'm going to make sure audio is working on my end here. Just check the feed. All right. Okay, so for those people that are watching live, if you want to introduce yourself, if you're not watching it live, if you're watching kind of the broadcast of it afterwards, you don't have to introduce yourself. You can if you want to. And for those people that are watching live, please feel free to introduce yourself and tell us where you're from. And if you have questions and topics that you want covered today, just feel free to enter them in the comments field. We'll try to get to as many as possible. I was going back through some of the questions that were asked in the last Hangout that we didn't have a chance to get to, so we'll try to incorporate some of those. And people could also submit questions in advance by sending an email to clubcubase@steinberg.de. So, and probably like many of you, I have my son at home, so he may interrupt in the middle of the Hangout, and I may have to put a new movie on for him. So I appreciate your patience with that, as it will happen inevitably. So it's just kind of the product of our stay-at-home time. All right, so we'll go ahead and see who's getting logged in. And we'll get started in just a couple of minutes. So if you're watching this in a rebroadcast, please, you may want to skip ahead. It usually takes maybe 8 to 10 minutes to get people logged in and questions going. But we'll try to, so if you wanted to skip ahead, we'll do that, and we'll try to have an index done in just a minute. Okay, so we'll go ahead and seeing people get logged in, seeing some familiar faces. Good to have Sir Robert from Atlanta, longtime Cubase fan. All right, so maybe before my son's already knocking, let me see if I get him started before the Hangout gets going. All right, my son apparently wanted a second lunch. All right, so I think he's squared away. We have a movie going. Okay, so let's see who. Okay, so we have Dave from Southern UK. He's been on and over the Hangouts at ALO. Good to see you on as well. Okay, so we have Bulgaria. Taylor from Pine Grove. Good to see you. All right, so we have Barcelona, Switzerland, Miami, Italy. Okay, so just seeing a couple questions. My family is all doing great. Thanks for asking. Okay, so we'll just go ahead and, all right, so we have Brazil, Wisconsin. Sweden, Quebec, Stockholm, Athens. Okay, so just reading through different questions are already coming in, so thanks for all that. So we have Denmark, California, Montreal, beautiful city. Vesuvio, Birmingham. So see a question, any news on when the VST Connect video will be ready? So it is, there was one that was posted yesterday in the Steinberg channel. You can check that out. And also for people that were interested in VST Connect, there's, I think starting today, there's a promotion going on the VST Connect Pro. So you could check out the Steinberg YouTube channel. All right, so we have Wales, Switzerland, Texas. Okay, we have Copenhagen, I probably pronounced that incorrectly, Belgium. Okay, just going through. And once again, if you want to send questions in advance, you can send it to clubcubase@steinberg.de. All right, so we have some more people logging in. We'll wait just a couple more minutes and get started. Thanks for your patience. Okay, some more people getting logged in. All right, so we have France. All right, so we have Robbie from Dallas, Galicia, Spain. Okay, so some more people logging in. We'll get started here maybe in just a minute. All right, so we have India, Nashville. All right, we have Dave and Kay from Nashville. Good to see you online. Okay, so we'll have some more people getting logged in. We'll get started here in just a minute. Okay. Someone pointed out that I missed Ireland, so yes, I did. So great to have you on from Ireland. I've always wanted to go there. All right, so we have Beverly Hills. All right, so my biggest fan in Serbia is checking in. That's good to know. All right, Saudi Arabia. All right, so Norway, Bristol. All right, some more people getting logged in. We have Hanover. I've been there before, maybe about 25 years ago. All right, Tampa, Williamsburg, Virginia. Not too far from where I am. Okay, so we have Moscow. There's a question on reversing. All right, so Cincinnati, Brooklyn, India again. All right, so we have some more people logging in. We'll give people just about 30 more seconds and get started. Okay, Rhode Island, Quebec City. Okay, so let's go ahead and get started. Thanks for everyone for joining the Hangout. My name is Greg Ondo. I'm presenting from Alexandria, Virginia, just outside Washington, D.C. So let's go ahead and take a look at some of the questions. Okay, so it says, hello, my question is with chord tracks. When in chord tracks, how do you set up harmony parts for vocals, and is it possible to do the same for guitar and keyboard tracks? Thank you. So if you want to experiment with doing different vocal harmonies that make sense musically, what we could do is I'll just go ahead and open up a project here, which has this kind of setup. Okay, so what I'm going to do in this example is there's a piano part that's in MIDI and a vocal part here, and I wanted to maybe generate some harmony parts. So I will double click and let's just look at my score in the bottom editor here. And at this point, I could see that I'm going to have different piano chords, and that's fine. But what I want to do is from my project menu, we could go to chord track. And what I want to do is just select this MIDI part. And I will say, let's create chord symbols. So as soon as I come over here, I generally find it good to include kind of the top two checked by default. And you could experiment. But what that's done now is automatically given me a chord track. So when we look at our chord track, I'll make this a little larger so that we could see exactly what chords. So when I want to actually do like my very audio editing, one of the things that's really handy is the fact that we could go to your very audio and we could actually colorize based upon the chord track. So when we go to the color icon here, we could look at notes based on their and the colors will indicate their kind of harmonic relation with the chords. So we can see a note that is red is out of key and out of scale. A green note is within the chord. A blue note is within the scale, so it's within key. And we could do this in the MIDI editors as well. So if you want to do like just really super fast pitch correction, from this window, you could select all. And if you go to the bottom center, you can just simply, knock things in tune. So if I want to take that phrase, tell me why, starting right here, I will now jump out into my main project window, and I'm going to use my range selection tool, and I could do this and let me just take my snap off, and we could do that by clicking here or hitting the letter J. So I could select that particular range. And what I want to do is now, since we know that this is a C9 chord going to a G chord, I could go to my project or my audio menu rather, and we could choose to go into generate harmony voices. And at this point, I will have it automatically give me 4 harmony parts. So we look at this. I will just kind of drop some of the volumes down slightly on this. And now as we listen to our harmonies, and if I wanted to, edit all of those parts together, we could select them all and go into our editor. And once we, I could see the active part defined for me right here. So you could just say, okay, I want to colorize these all again by the chord track. So if I wanted to change the harmonies, I could select the different, multiple parts here. So let's say if I didn't want that to resolve, I could just kind of and change the harmonies. And if I select a different voice, I'm able to adjust those kind of just as easily. So if you wanted to just modify the harmonies. But again, once you have the chord tracks defined, and if you have like a MIDI part, at that point we could go and have the chords automatically generated from that, and then go to your audio menu to generate harmony voices. And then once you have that done, it will just generate the vocal harmonies for you. So you could do it for like a monophonic guitar part, or if you wanted to work with, if you have a keyboard part, you could obviously do it for MIDI stuff quite easily, but it's not really designed to treat polyphonic materials. We had a question that was sent in earlier. Can we, do chord extraction directly from an audio event? It's currently limited to MIDI, but I think some of the technologies are getting a little stronger where it'll be pretty viable soon. So we can do this for MIDI, but we can't necessarily do it for audio at this point. Okay, so moving on. Okay, so question, what is the best way to mix a track to get the maximum loudness without getting distortion when mixing down? So, gain structure, can make a big difference overall, so, sometimes, why certain tracks will sound louder, even if you look at them and it's like, why is it not, the amplitude of the waveform isn't as strong, but it sounds louder. That seems counterintuitive. Like arrangements can make a big deal. But, once you come over here, and a lot of people, will add processing like a multi-band compressor or a limiter on the master bus. So, this is pretty typical to, have a limiter. And, you could put this into your master bus to get that. And some people there's a lot of people that kind of cheat by working constantly with the limiter on. And I've heard some people say that you're just kind of lying to yourself, and to make the mix by itself without that sound as full and rich as possible. Once you do an audio export, you can come over here and do the export audio mix down. And as you do this, if you want it to, I think it just had the wrong selection. So if you do an export audio mix down, you could choose to import directly into the track. So you say import and create audio track. And what a lot of people do, and we kind of talked about this in the last Hangout, is once we have that done, is you could go directly to your audio to processes, and then there's a normalize function. So I'll just go ahead and do this. And now with 10.5, you have the options of normalizing to a specific dB value, or you could use loudness units. For example, a lot of broadcast facilities want a file that's around 23, minus 23 loudness units. Some other companies will want to, a lot of streaming services may be at minus 14 loudness units. So you could actually just kind of set your loudness units level there if you wanted to. So that's some ways that you could do it. But, try to make the mix itself, with the arrangement as full and rich as possible without necessarily having to resort to, always having a master effects chain going in. So a lot of people are mixing kind of to their master effects chain, and it kind of bites them in the end. So those are a couple quick tips. All right, so we'll move on. Thanks for great questions. Okay, we have a question from Millard. Why do recorded parts sometimes have a slightly different tempo from the project tempo? This misaligns the part if I put it into musical mode. I've seen that on one or two files, and I've seen it sometimes with files maybe that were recorded at different sample rates when that happens, and that could give you an indication. If you see different, if you know that you've recorded at a specific tempo, you could go to the pool window and we could see the tempo information here. So I may have some loops, but you could just double click. And I think if you select a number of files here, you could double click. And let's see if I just want to put in. So if you just, have all of them selected, you could change all of them to the same value if you wanted to. So if you wanted to kind of overwrite that, you could do that as well. One other question I think that Millard had asked in a previous Hangout was that he had purchased some of the loop libraries, and not all of the icons were showing up, like for the VST Sound Loops collection. So if you do this, if they don't show up, they should show up by default. So I did it on my PC and they showed up, and when I did it on my Mac, they didn't. So I we're trying to figure this out. And then in the preferences of Cubase, and if you're on PC, you could, go to your Cubase data folder. So if you click on your start menu, go to all programs where you see Cubase, click on the Cubase folder, you'll see this, all programs. If on Mac, you would go to Go, and then hold down the Alt or Option key and go to Library, and then to Preferences and go to Cubase. But what they had me do after kind of working with the, with the developers a little bit was to delete. I think there's the media defaults XML and the media 3.db files, and and then restarting it did the trick, and then all the different icons would show up. So if you wanted to give that a try, Millard. Okay, so question from Taylor. When using reverb on multiple tracks with Ascend, I solo one of those tracks and I hear reverb from all of the tracks. How could I solo one track with reverb and not hear the others sent to that reverb? Okay, so let's say if I'll just revert this file before I destroy it with wrong tempo stamps. Okay, so let's say if I have my reverb here, and we'll just make sure. Okay, so on my voice.
You stare at the ground,
And let's say my piano has the same reverb. So I'll just add way too much reverb in the piano.
Tell me why.
All right.
Something's wrong. We can't go on living a lie. How can I feel you?
Okay, so we have both of these tracks going to the reverb, and so it says, how could I solo one track with the reverb and not hear the other tracks being sent to that reverb? So
How can I see you when you're running high?
And let me just check, see if there's a preference. That doesn't sound like it's
From the light.
sending that, but let me see. There may be a preference that could do this. Let me just take a look. So it sounds, and let me just see if switching it to, see if I switch it to pre-fader, if that makes a difference.
So afraid to smile. You think that
So when you hear, if I solo so it seems like it's not routing. So when I just have this, but if I soloed the reverb return channel, so let's say if I sneak down here to where my reverence is. All right. And let's say if I just have these two. So, it seems like that's working, but I know what some people do to only hear the reverb going on. So it doesn't seem like the reverb is bleeding to me. But if you also just hit on the reverb return channel here, so let's come here and let's say here's our reverence. So, you could also hit the listen mode. And this would allow you to isolate just the reverb without the original sources. But it seems like when I'm soloing the track that, I'm not hearing the reverb bleed from other tracks. There's a lot of tracks that have reverb on there. I'm just hearing that. So, but if I'm doing something different, Taylor, just let me know and make sure I'm understanding your question. Okay, so another question. When I'm exporting audio mixdown, post-process allows upload to SoundCloud, but I don't see an option to go to Wavelab 7. Is there a way to configure it to show Wavelab? I think this started in Wavelab. It was kind of a two-way communication between Wavelab and Cubase. So I don't think it did it in version 7. It wasn't an option. I think it's when it started was maybe 8.5 or Wavelab 9. And if you're not familiar with this process, you could just say, I want to do export audio mix down. And you could say after export, there's a post process. And here you could choose to just have that file automatically go to Wavelab. And I think it's maybe 8.5 or 9 that had that capability in Wavelab. So you may not, I don't think you'll see it for version 7. Okay. Okay, I see a question. Why is musical mode in the sampler track sometimes not available? So let me just drag a quick loop into my sampler control. Okay. So sometimes you want to make sure, there's the audio warping. And so if we come here, we could just say, I'll just choose my start position a little earlier here. So let's say if I just, and I won't have it soloed, sorry. And as I do this generally, it slows down just like a traditional sampler. If I play a higher pitch, the sample plays back depending upon the pitch. But if I click on the audio warp, and sometimes it's a subtle thing, you could click here. And now when we do this, we could say we want it to be in music mode. I want it to sync to the tempo. And now when I play, it'll play back the same tempo there. So, but make sure that you just have the audio warp enabled. So sometimes some people don't find it because it's kind of, it's a bit grayed out. All right, hang on one second. My son is out knocking on the door. All right, sorry about that. All right, so sometimes it's not as obvious. And here. So just make sure that the audio warp is turned on. So if you work with a preset, it may have the audio warp enabled by default. So, but I think that may do it. But if not, let me know. Okay, is there a way to import a VRAC VE Pro used from another project file? I don't think so. I think it's going to be two separate. I don't use VE Pro, so I'm not sure if the VRAC is part of VE Pro or if it's what you use to access within Cubase. If it's something that's being used to access from Cubase, you might be able to right click if it's a particular track and do a save track preset. But if it's like a rack within the VE Pro software, it's going to not be able to be imported directly into Cubase. Okay, so question, is there a way to import a pattern from Groove Agent or MIDI into Beat Designer? Let's give it a try. Thanks for your patience. Okay, so let's go to just find some beats really quickly. Okay, I'll just drag. Okay, most boring beat of all time, but let me just come over here as a MIDI insert. I know you could drag out of Beat Designer, and I think there's some trick to be able to maybe do it, but I'll give it a shot here. So I think you could drag out, but I'm not sure if you could drag in, but there may be some way of doing it, but I don't know off the top of my head, but I could do some more research on that. Okay, question, is there a way to have tempo definition inserted upon export from Cubase 9.5, or do I need to upgrade to be able to export audio files that will follow the tempo in other DAWs? So if you come directly to the, generally like the tempo stamp information will be carried over, but if we, once we go to the audio menu and if you go to advanced, there's and I'll go ahead and just kind of select an audio event here. And at this point, you could say set definition from tempo, and this will write that data into the file. And that file metadata will be preserved when exporting to other DAWs. So that will be preserved. So once you just simply do that, so try to go into your audio, and I'm about 99% sure that if you just choose, and you could select multiple files at once, to set definition from tempo, that even if it had tempo changes, that information will be embedded in the audio file itself as part of the metadata. Okay, so I see a question, will Wavelab be ARA2 compatible in the future? I think it has some semblance of it. I know that, it kind of allows you to do, it may not be exactly ARA2, but I know if you're doing spectral layers that you could define an external editor and have that work. So, but I'm not positive if it is ARA2 or if there's kind of a link between that and spectral layers. Okay, question. Is there a way to restore a deleted template? If you have if you deleted the file, it won't be available as a template. But what you could do if you run into a situation, if you have a project that was created with a template, you could choose to come over here and just say, we want to import tracks from project. So I'll just go ahead and we'll select this. And I could choose to, and this is not in 9.5, so this kind of came in 10. But in 10.10 and 10.5, you could just say, I want to I could just select all the tracks and choose not to have my events and parts. And that could import everything. If you have a project that was done, I think you're in Cubase 9.5. If you load up a project, delete all, select all of the files, hit delete, and go into your pool window under media. At this point, you could right click and say removed unused media, and that'll kind of get you to the same spot that you were. So that way you could now save that as a template. And that should kind of get you to the same spot as where you were with your template. But it's always a good idea to kind of back up templates to multiple locations, or at least another location if possible. Okay, going through some more questions. Okay, so I see another question. Any news when the VST Connect video be ready? So my colleague Dom Sagalis did one. I think it was released yesterday, so you can go to the Steinberg channel to check that out. He always does a great job with his videos. Okay. Okay, so it says from Quebec, Canada, I have this problem with my Cubase. Each time I turn it on, I have to reboot all my MIDI devices so I can use them. So, if maybe Samuel, if you could tell us if you're running Cubase, which version of Cubase and which platform. I think it was 8.5 that actually had the ability to, on a Windows platform for a long time, if you didn't have your controller enabled before Cubase started up, you'd have to, and let's say you connect your controller after Cubase launched, that you would have to restart Cubase for it to see it. But since 8.5, I believe, once you had that automatically once you connected a MIDI device into your PC or Mac, it would automatically be recognized and be available. So if you're running prior to 8.5, that was a feature that was added. But, if it's after 8.5, it could be a driver issue, maybe with your MIDI interfaces, but I don't think it's necessarily a Cubase thing. So it shouldn't do that. But if maybe in the comments, if you could specify whether it's Mac or PC and which version of Cubase, that would be helpful. Okay. Would love to know about sending MIDI back to my synth. Do you have info on that? So, if you have a synthesizer hooked up, and let's just say I have some MIDI data here. Just load up a quick project here. I'll just revert this one. Sending MIDI data out to a synth versus, other devices is really, very similar. So, you're going to start with a MIDI track as opposed to an instrument track by default. So if you do that, you say, okay, I want to add a MIDI track, and you give it a name, hit enter. And the key thing that you want to do is to make sure that you have this particular output destination going to the hardware MIDI interface that you have. So, like my UR24C interface that I'm using here has a MIDI port, and if I had my synthesizer hooked up to it, at that point, that would automatically send the MIDI data from this track out of that MIDI port into the synthesizer. So you could do that, and a lot of the synthesizers made in the last 15, 20 years can come with USB, so you'd see the USB MIDI driver if that's the case. Maybe some vintage synths, in like pre-2002-ish, may not have USB, but, you could see the USB driver if that's connected and send the data out that way or out to through your standard MIDI interface as well. Okay. It says, hi, Greg. When MIDI track contents are changed as a result of following the chord track, is there a way to get back to the MIDI data created prior to having followed the chord track? All right, so let me go ahead and I'll just do this quickly here. We'll give it a test. So I'll just go ahead and generate my chord track from my piano part again. So I'll just come here. Then I'll change some of the chord symbols. Okay, so I'll move my piano part up here. And let's say in this G sus4, I want to change that to a D. So I could just come there. All right, so I will. So once I have this track set to follow the chord track, we could just say, let's get to chords, and now we'll just say follow to scale. And now we should see this chord, these MIDI notes here change accordingly. Okay, so let's see if so it will just show up as an undo, update voicings. And let me just see if there's maybe a key command for that. So, it will show up. Let's say if I did some other edits, it will show up in your edit history to undo. And let me just see if I've done those. And so let me just go back to that stage. And if I just choose for, let's say, not to follow the chord track. Yeah, so I think you're going to just have to undo that and kind of be aware of it maybe when you do it, but I don't know a way to selectively go back to where you were. I know what I've heard some people do is just kind of make a track version of this. So where you could say, I wanted to do this and let's duplicate the version. So let's say we have the original. And then come back. That may not. Looks like that's doing it from the track level. So I think it might just be an undo, but I could see if there's a kind of restore original function somewhere. I don't know of one, but it's a great question. Okay, so we have a question. In the old days, when we recorded to magnetic tape, we kept the levels hot in the red to minimize noise floor. Is that the best way to treat tape saturation plugins? Yeah, it's you're not adding, recording at kind of low signal to, let's say if you have a low level amplitude, like a softer passage, people would generally kind of slam the tape just to make sure that you weren't, you didn't have a huge noise floor issue. So you could kind of follow the same paradigm, when tracking. It's not as critical in digital because if it's recorded quieter, it doesn't necessarily have the noise floor. It could have some from the mic pre and analog chain, but the recording medium itself isn't adding any noise to it. So you could, when using plugins such as like the Magneto plugin, and you could do this directly from like the channel strip as well. So, and generally these plugins will be set up just as, not necessarily, most people won't track through it, but will have it on the mixing bus. And then, you're not really, it's taking a different approach than trying to overcome limitations of the recording medium. So you can kind of, use it to taste as opposed to using it as a crutch to fix kind of a deeper problem with recording to magnetic tape. All right. So good to see Robbie Bowling from Dallas. I think he's a loyal Hangout follower here. It's great to see him on. I see him at clinics at Audio Dog at Spunky's place in Dallas. Okay. Okay, so going through comments. Hello, I often use random values for velocity inserted with Logical Editor, especially for drums. Is there a way, any way to program Logical Editor to set random velocity values for more than one note? So let's go ahead and take a look. I think you could do that quite easily. So I will just go ahead and let's say if we're doing, you mentioned especially for drums. So let's say if I just wanted to create a quick fake drum part here. Okay. Imagine this is beautiful drums. Sorry. So right now I have all these all basically the same velocity level. And let's pull up our logical editor. So I think the logical editor, can kind of function on what is selected. So we'll go to the logical editor and we want to say our type is equal to notes, but I just say value 2. We want it to be, okay, so let me just start over again before I have a brain cramp, sorry. Okay, so we'll say notes, and then what we want to do is to take our value 2 and we'll say set the random values between, let's say, 40 and 80. Okay, so and then on the function I choose transform. So now I have that part selected as opposed to individual parts here. So now I hit apply. And we could see that that has now done it to, it's randomized all of the different velocity. So it's not just, so if you have like in a drum editor, for instance, all of one, like, a lot of people just shift double click to select all the kicks or all the hi-hats. But if you just, have a different event selected here, I could just see that this will just change all of the parameters that are selected with the logical editor. So make sure that you have like a part selected as opposed to an individual note, for instance. So I see question, Greg, what's the best way to do a feature request? Is it the forum? I still, it's you could always pass it on in the Hangout. You could pass it on into a forum. I have regular communication to kind of send feedback with the product planning and development, and we always have ongoing discussions. So, you could email me at clubcubase@steinberg.de. Sometimes, feature requests, someone, one of the things that happens a lot is, it could be like a small part of a really big project and people want that very small part. And then the big project comes out and it takes a while to deliver the huge new feature of which, may have, 32 other sub features. And sometimes they'll wait to have kind of the big picture thing. But, please feel free to email me at clubcubase@steinberg.de. Okay, question, why you cannot use two external audio interfaces in a Windows 10 computer to see all I/O in Cubase 10. In Mac, it's possible. Update, I hope so. So generally, what you have with in the Mac side is you deal with core audio and aggregate devices. There's a couple of drawbacks. One is it's not doesn't really seem to function well for clocking between multiple devices. And when we're dealing with digital audio, if your two different devices are set to different clocks and are kind of freewheeling, that's not necessarily such a good thing. So we could do that. And also when on the Mac side, when you have multiple audio interfaces, the latency gets to be compounded and it causes a lot of issues. So that's why, we choose to have kind of playback that's, a known entity and that we know that the clock source will be consistent through playback. So that's why we don't necessarily see it on the Windows side. So it's not a conspiracy or anything like that. It's just kind of, the practicality of it. And, you may, think of investing in interfaces that have expansion options, such as like an ADAT in, so people can get our 8 channels in and out of your system as well. So, but that's the reason why. Okay. So question, how do I get sound for my media samples on right screen to monitor the samples show, but I have no sound for them? What's going on with when going through them? So if you want to audition your different samples on the right hand zone here, you could just go directly to, so say if I go to my loops and browsers and I wanted to just audition. So the one thing you want to do is, if you're running Cubase Pro, is go to your audio connections, and generally this gets routed to what's called the listen bus. It's kind of this, obscurely documented aspect, but make sure that you have the control room activated. So if I have just my outputs here, and let's say on my stereo bus, I may not, as I do this, I don't hear the outputs because the preview goes through the control room. So as soon as I go into my audio connections and go to control room and activate it there, and if we have that output defined, that monitoring path defined in the control room, we want to have our bus set to not connected. Otherwise the sound could get sent out twice. And as soon as we do that, You can audition your different loop files. Here, make sure I did it right. I probably messed up my connections. So now, once I have that defined in a control room, you can audition all your samples and hear it. Okay, let's go through more questions. Thanks for all the wonderful questions again. If you've learned a tip or trick, please feel free to subscribe to the channel and make sure you give it a thumbs up. All right. Okay, so hey Greg, hello from the US. Could you cover ways to do reverb automation and some use cases for this? You know, a lot of times, you know, people may open up reverbs depending, you know, reverbs or reverb times depending on the actual project. You know, you may want to have more reverb going into a bridge or something, you know, so those are some typical parameters that you could do. So let's say if I wanted to look at my reverb send here, you know, and I'll just kind of, so I'll click onto my W and R. So I may want to open it up for that passage. Let's say I want to be a little more intimate. So now we could just listen to that again. And you could do all sorts of, you know, automating of parameters within the reverb, but, you know, that's a typical use for, you know, doing, you know, reverb automation. And, you know, there's plenty of other uses depending how tweaky you want to get. But, you know, something simple like that is you know, I see a lot of people do a kind of effective uses of automating their reverbs. Okay. Okay, so I see a question. What is the mixer summing option specifically for? So I think this might be for our, let me just set it up with another project. So there is a option called direct summing. And what that's going to allow you to do is, let's say if I have like all of my drums going to two different groups, like if I was doing parallel processing. So I'm just going to add two group channels here. And we'll make them stereo groups. Okay, so I have group 1 and 2. And I'm going to go into my full screen mixer. And we have this little option in the upper right-hand corner, this little drop-down menu. I'll go to my racks, and if once you click on your racks, you'll see an option for direct routing. So if I wanted to, at this point, take all of my drums in this project and send it to multiple destinations. So right now, all of my drums are going to my stereo output. In selecting all of my drums here, if I wanted them all to go to a group, I could use a send and hold down Alt Shift or enable Quick Link here. So I'll turn on Quick Link. And now all the selected channels I could send directly to group 1, and I could also send them to group 2. So when I do this, you could notice that as soon as I click on group 2, group 1 kind of gets a bit diminished in color. So now, as I do this, all my drums will go through this one bus. So if I drop that bus volume, I can control all of my drums. And if I click here, while Quick Link is still on, they're now all going to the second bus. But if I wanted them to go to the buses simultaneously, I could go to this drop-down mode and we see direct routing summing mode on. So now I could send to multiple destinations. So we'll just turn these on. And this would allow me to do like parallel processing. So if I come here, I could take one of them and like really squash it compression wise. So I could have kind of the squashed bus and then unsquashed bus, where this one has more dynamics and this one could add more punch in overall. Whereas if direct routing summing mode was off and unchecked, it wouldn't sum those two. So that's what that mode is for. So, but if I misunderstood your question, just let me know. Okay. Okay, so we have a question from Saudi Arabia. When I use Groove Agent to slice a loop to change its tempo, what happens that the tempo decreases when I raise it up? How can I fix it? All right, so if we have a situation like that, let me just open up in our project. See if this is the right project. Okay, so let's say if I have a drum loop going on here, and I'll just solo that and turn down the kill on the volume. Okay, so now let's say, and I wanted to just go directly to I'll add a VST instrument of Groove Agent. Okay, and now what I could do is just drag this particular loop onto one of the instrument pads. So as soon as I do that, I could trigger the entire sample. But what a very clever thing to do is just to go over here to the slice parameter and then click on create slices in the bottom corner. And now each different slice has been mapped to each of the pads. And at the same time, you have in Groove Agent performance or instrument pads and pattern pads. It's created its own pattern here. So, but once you've created the slices in Groove Agent, so if you wanted to incorporate that directly onto your project page, you could just drag and place that, and this will kind of be almost like, tempo parasite. So because what it's doing when I play this, it's just triggering the actual MIDI notes here. So we'll just look at how the sample is done. So as we play this, I'll just take my loop off. Sorry about that. And if I slow down my tempo in the project, it'll just kind of, those MIDI notes will automatically be slower because it's just triggering those MIDI events. If I wanted to duplicate that a couple times, like Command D, I could also, just have the flexibility to take like maybe something that was a little more obvious of a loop and be able to kind of deconstruct it. So I could have a variation of that, but I don't see any changes. The tempo decreases when you raise it up. So I'll try to go to raise the tempo up here, and we'll see if the tempo decreases. So and let's say if I create my slices here in the pattern, so I don't see the tempo decreasing when the tempo, the playback speed decrease as it's playing up. But if I misunderstand your question, just, leave a comment. Okay, hang on 1 second. My son is knocking again. All right, sorry about that. All right, so we'll move on to the next question. Okay, so sorry, my feed just jumped way ahead. Sorry about that. Let me just navigate back. Okay, question. I'm experimenting with custom colors, but cannot make my mind up. Do you prefer the dark theme or light theme? Naturally, it's a personal choice. Any thoughts? So it is entirely personal. Some people love kind of dark mode, and sometimes I've seen people switch if, working during the day versus at night, like on the Steinberg YouTube channel, there's an artist spotlight with Ammon Tobin, who's a really fascinating musician, producer, composer. And he spent a lot of money in his studio to make it look like it was night all the time because he felt more creative at night. I've seen some people, a lot of composers will take different aspects of the program, like if they don't like the key editor being so dark, to go into preferences. And when you go into preferences here and go to user interface, and in the editor area background, kind of just raise that up, so that when they're doing editing, or sorry, I did the wrong one. All right, so if you come here, your editor area background, because this is how their Cubase looked from a zillion years ago, and they're just very used to it. So it really it's a totally personal thing. I will sometimes just kind of change mine up. Probably more out of boredom than anything else. But let's just jump back to like, I'll just choose my editor area background, and then here I'll just choose defaults. So, but I find sometimes when I go back to earlier versions of Cubase, that I want to turn the lights off a little bit at times. So I guess the kind of darker modes have kind of grown on me, but it's totally a personal preference. You can make a decision either way and be completely right. Okay, so seeing a question, Steve McCrae from Atlanta. Good to see you, Steve. I think he used to work at Rhythm City. I miss Rhythm City. Hi, Greg. Enjoying using Cubase again. It's everything I was looking for. That's great to hear. Steve's a wonderful musician. He's played on many great records. All right. And toured with many great people. Okay. So it says, hi, Greg. Can you explain the reverse process of audio and something associated with it to make it blend with the song? Can you also spend a couple minutes on offline processing? So let's go ahead and take a look at a couple of things. So let's say, I'll just take a look. I remember working with one of the guys from Maroon 5, kind of had a similar question he asked me once. I'll just do a new project. And let's say I just want to find like a cymbal sound. Say just like maybe a cymbal crash. All right, so let's say I wanted to do something like this. I'll drag that file in, and let's just find a loop. Yeah, and this is a common little technique for making something maybe a little more interesting. Okay, so let's say I wanted that loop, and like as a transition, I will just have, let's say we have this sound going, and I'll choose not to mute everything. All right. So, what a lot of people want to do is, very common to do like just processing. So you could do a lot of offline processing, and you could access this by hitting F7. All right, so let's come over here, and the offline processing is incredibly powerful. So, if you find yourself running out of CPU or you want to do different processes, we could come here and just do this. And you could access a lot of the functions by going to your audio menu, and then, you could see plugins and processes. So if I wanted to, just reverse this particular sample, to have just kind of a, and that's a pretty common little transition trick, just kind of, maybe just take two different sounds that were fading out and just, and one of the things you could do is sometimes you may notice that, if you wanted that to have a little more impact on, let's say if I had these moved over a measure, like in the middle of a song, and I'll just go ahead and group these two together here. I'll just hit Command or Control G. And now as I move one element, they'll all move. So let's say I wanted the very tip of, this event and we could go into some of the sample editing functions. So let's say if I just go to my definition, you could have what's called a sync point. So we could say like, I want the very apex of that crescendo there just to be the sync point. So I will unlink these by hitting Control or Command U. And now if I choose to move this, now when I have my snap turned on, and I could do that by hitting the letter J, it's not going to actually snap based on the beginning, but on the end of the event. So this way, when I go to snap, it's going to be based on this sync point or snap point. And that's what is kind of using it as the basis for the foundation. So you could just do a... So that's a pretty common trick for using reversing in a lot of contemporary productions. So, okay. So it says, I have projects that often, not always, crash upon opening. Very careful, and contain some not so efficient plugins. Any way to open up the project without loading and or initializing all of the plugins. And this is from Millard Brown. Once you start Cubase, if you hold down Alt Control Shift or Command Option Shift, you could actually start the program in what's almost like a diagnostic mode. You could choose to temporarily disable the preferences or temporarily disable. You could choose to delete the preferences, but there's also a third mode that came in 10.5, which would allow you to disable all third-party plugins. So if you're running into situations where it's like, you're pretty sure that it's like maybe an old 32-bit plugin that for some reason you're still bridging after all these years, and it's causing issues in your project, try to start with, in the diagnostic mode, again, Command Option Shift or Alt Control Shift, and then try saving the project again under a different name. And at that point, you could see what it's like. You could probably isolate it to a plugin, but that would allow you to kind of start Cubase and be able to open projects without it accessing any third-party plugins. Okay. Okay, so let's see. Can we change track colors by using the logical editor script? Yeah, so let's say if I come here, okay, so we have drums, and I'll just... So let's say, I have multiple parts here, and I'll just add another track for guitar. Okay, so let's say these are... Okay, so I could go into if I wanted to colorize based on names, and we go into your project logical editor, and what we want to do is we want to transform, and we're going to say name contain something like drum. Okay, and for our action target, what we want to do is we'll go to set color, and we'll set it to a fixed value. And so now I can say every name track that has a name drum, colorize to color 4. And that way you could just say all vocals, all tracks that have GUI for guitar or BA for bass, or BAS for bass, whatever. So once again, to do this in a project logical editor, choose the function to transform, name, contains, and you could have multiple conditions for these, and you could fire off these presets from different keyboard shortcuts as well. Set color. So, and then set to a fixed value, and you could colorize just like that. Okay, question. I wanted to know if there's a function or macro to make my MIDI data strum up or down in the editor. So there's not necessarily like a perfect strumming type of thing. But one thing that a lot of people don't know is, let's say if I have a MIDI track here. Say I have my beautiful composition. All right, but there's a line tool if you use this. So you could, within the key editor. So if you say, okay, I just want to split. So if you want to do something like that, or if you hold down the Alt, you could choose to just have that kind of, stagger the notes accordingly. So you could say, okay, now I just want to stagger those, and you could do it to the ends or beginnings. So play around with, if you have kind of block chords. To some other techniques that people do is on the chord pads is you could drag different playing options. So if you wanted to do that, and you could trigger chords. Some people will also use some of the MIDI inserts like the Apache SX, and with the Apache SX you could drag once you click on the sequencer, you could drag like an arpeggiated pattern into that and just have that automatically do kind of strumming patterns for you. Okay. Okay, so it says, hi, Greg. Thank you for all these very helpful videos. You're welcome. I hope everyone's learning a couple tips and tricks. I have the X-Touch 1 controller. It seems like it doesn't automatically switch banks, only 8 when I click on the track outside of the bank. I heard a lot of controllers can be, part of the Mackie control specification. I think only allows you to kind of go up and down in banks of 8. So some of the controllers, one thing that makes, like Steinberg has one, it's manufactured by Yamaha called the CC121. And that's a single fader unit, and it does a really great job of, I select this, and that's, and that's the active control for that particular track without, having to configure everything. But I think if it's only working kind of switch banks and only 8, that's kind of a limitation of the control paradigm, the Mackie control paradigm that they're using. So for that architecture. So. Okay, says it works fine with other DAWs. Is there any Mackie control to fix the issue I'm not aware of? You might be able to come over here, and if you go to your studio setup, and we click on the plus to add a Mackie control. You have these different user buttons, and what you could do is probably choose to just, navigate, set these up to navigate, up, down, left, right. So, that may help with that. But, it's really kind of, I think, a limitation of the Mackie control implementation. Okay, so see, chord pads, how do I disable the notes being played on an external device that are the same as the chord pad trigger notes? Okay, so let me just take a look at that. Just open up a new project. So like here I have some of the chord pads just triggering. And let me just see if my MIDI controller is kind of hooked up in this particular octave. Okay, I'll go down an octave here. So now I could have like different guitar patterns that are being triggered by the chord. Okay, so I'm just going to read this again quickly. So it seems like it doesn't automatically. Okay, how do I disable the notes from being played on an external device that are same? So if you're triggering it to an external device, make sure that you don't, if this is set to all MIDI inputs, make sure that, it could be that these others are kind of being triggered. So let's say. So let's say if this is record enabled. So, just make sure that the other tracks aren't record enabled. Then Cubase is not sending it out to out to any of our devices. The only devices that the chord track is being sent to is going to be the track that's record enabled. But if I'm misunderstanding, let me know. Okay, so let's see. Question: VST Connect, it's okay now? Yeah, so there's a new version released last week, and that seems to be working great for people that were having issues with it before. So yeah, definitely give it a try. And again, as I mentioned at the top of the Hangout, there's a promotion going on currently. So I think it's 50% off, which is a great deal for so many people that are stuck at home. Okay, question. Is there anything I can do about text scaling issues in Cubase 10.5? The text doesn't adjust properly when zooming, mainly in the mixer window. Some of this could be, and you don't say if it's a Mac or PC. So sometimes when you run into text scaling stuff, it could be maybe a high DPI setting on Windows. So I think if you go to like your studio setup, I think I don't have it. The setting isn't on Mac, but try to see if you disable the high DPI mode, if that makes a difference. And you may want to try within Windows to set different scaling resolutions, but I think that will take care of it for you. Okay, so question: does Very Audio 3 have a global tune? I'm not sure what you mean by global tune. I know sometimes people want it to, if it's maybe the question's dealing with if you're working with A is 440 or A is 442, one of those scenarios. And so I get this question periodically, and I could be mistaken on this question again, where as people are doing tuning, let me just set up I'll just bounce this very quickly. So periodically I get a question of like, the people want to do very audio, but when they snap let's say we do the analysis of our parts, that it is snapping to where a tuning scale of A is 442, like 440. And some people are, getting into like, A is 432 and feel that that's better for them. Or A, like I know Stevie Wonder, for instance, like A very specifically to him is 442. For A3 or whatever, that particular pitch, it's, not 440. So he has everything tuned to A is 442. That's what sounds right to his perfect pitch ears. So if you run into that, and you wanted to transpose, what you could do is just simply go to the fine tuning parameters here. And then you could have this go up or down different cent values to match. So now if you're an A is 442, when you adjust, on playback as this is played and you're doing your very audio editing, you could at that point have it snap and it will, deal with it'll add the extra 2 cents or take away 8 cents depending on your tuning scale. So you don't necessarily set it within Very Audio, but you could have Cubase play back and do different tuning scales if needed. But if I'm misunderstanding, just let me know. For older Hangouts, I'm looking at the one Quadrafuzz from a year ago. Is there any way to display the comments from the Hangout? I can see the usual YouTube comments, but not for the running stream. At some point, the YouTube Live started capturing and documenting all the comments during the stream. It was a couple years ago, but the earlier Hangouts, the YouTube Live or the Google Hangout didn't capture that. So it was kind of lost during, as soon as the Hangout happened and, we stopped the Hangout, the live portion of the Hangout, those were all kind of lost. So I'm glad to see that the comments are now kind of carried over. So, but there was a definite change in the live streams from Google that changed how that worked. So you may not be able to see it, but if you have a question on Quadrafuzz, let me know. And, or if you send me the Hangout, I could probably tell you, I could probably maybe figure out what the question was and could help you with that. Okay. So I see Cubase 11. When? So, probably when it's ready is always a great question. I think Steinberg has been, very German in their release schedules. So, if you look back over the precedents of the last, 10 years or so, you might get an idea of the time frame. Cubase 10.5 just came out in, November-ish, October, late October, early November, something like that. So, so you could probably figure it out. Okay. Okay, so someone is speculating December 2020. I could speculate. I could only speculate as well. Okay. Okay, it says I have a session, but the MIDI drums don't line up to the audio, even though I set the BPM correctly. Even if it's hard to know from the question if it seems like the MIDI drums are not playing, correctly with it, or one thing to be aware of, like if for the MIDI part itself, there's 2 different time base modes. One is going to be for musical mode, and one is linear mode, and these could be changed on audio or MIDI tracks and you could do this for audio tracks. You could do it on the event itself, and MIDI tracks you could do it just on the track. But audio tracks can do it on a track or event. So what you want to do is make sure that your MIDI track is in musical mode, and once it's set to musical mode, then the MIDI will automatically follow the tempo of the tempo track. But if you have everything set up and it's in linear mode, and then if the tempos change, there's a good chance that once it's in linear mode, the playback position is actually deals more with the where it is in time versus where it is on the bar and beat. So if you change the tempo, it's going to play back at the same time. If you do the bar and beat, and if it's in musical mode, that will change depending on the tempo. So it could be just that you may have to take one of the tracks, to musical mode or not. Okay. Okay, so we have a question. Hi, Greg. Can you reorder the processes in offline processing? So let's go ahead and take a look. Let's say I have my vocal going on here.
On your heart,
And I will just go ahead and just do some offline processing of this. I always switch between two keyboards, and the function keys are slightly different orientation. So I'm always like one function key off between my two keyboards. It frustrates me. All right, so let's say if I've done some processing, and I'll just do a small section here. So it's just, okay, so I wanted to, fade in, and you may get this message, but you could just say proceed and keep. Okay, and then let's say I wanted to reverse, so my fade in turned into a fade out. I wanted to add more gains, let's say, or take gain away. So I'll say minus 10 dB. It's just maybe minus 3 dB. I will just do an envelope change here. And let's go ahead and run it through a plugin. Let's say a chopper plugin. So now when I play this back,
for 1,000 years and a day.
so now we'll see my totally destroyed. So if I wanted to change the order of the processes, let's say if I wanted to chopper first, I could just select it and drag it between the fade in and the reverse. So if you want to change the order, just drag and drop. And if you wanted to delete one process, and that's even 10 years later, no problem. Or you could choose to delete all, and you're right back to where you were. So just simply select it and drag it up and down, and you could change the order in the direct offline processing. Okay, so we have a question. How do you change the tempo in the middle of a song? When do you change? Where do you change that so you can hear it increase or decrease in tempos through a song? Can you also change time signatures in parts of a song? So yeah, you could definitely do that. So if you come here, all right, we just revert this quickly. I think we have this in. Okay, so if I'm here, I think we have this in musical mode. So what we could do is just right click and let's add a tempo track. Okay. So we want to make sure at first that we have the tempo activated. So we can activate the tempo. So we're going to see our tempo is set to 91 beats a minute.
You wished it all away, and I'm left here for 1,000.
So if I wanted to have a tempo change, let's say here.
And a day, you
don't have this all in musical mode. I think I'll just open up another example, I think. So if all the tracks are set to musical mode, you could do this quite easily. So I just try like a pretty large project here. Okay, so let's see if I have a tempo track here. And it just dropped the tempo change in. And I don't have everything in that project. And let me see. See if I have this one. It might. So if you have all the files set to musical mode, we could do this quite easily. So let me. So I'll just revert this one. So I'll show you how to do musical mode in all of them as well. So let's say we have. When we go to our pool window, we can see that this is all around 100 beats a minute. And all these, we can see musical mode, and we could select all the files and check musical mode. So we'll go to my tempo track now. Activate it. And here the bass isn't in musical mode, so I'll just switch that. You could also put tracks in musical mode by clicking. And now Cubase can automatically. So we get to here, it's going to slow down. Let's have it really slow down here. So you could just kind of write your different tempo changes in, and if all the tracks are in musical mode, you could select all of your tracks here. So let's just select all, and then place those into musical mode. Then they'll automatically follow. And if you wanted to have different types of, and when we come over here, let's say to our tempo track, let me just select only the tempo track, so you could have, different colors for your tempo track if you wanted to, and you could do kind of the same thing for adding a signature track. So, if at this point in the song, grab your pencil tool, this is going to be in 3/4. This is going to be in 6/8. You could just enter in different time signatures and tempo changes wherever you want. Okay, so we have a question. I just bought the Pro upgrade, Pro update, and that's another thing that's going on. There's a current promotion if you have Cubase Artist or Cubase Elements. I think it's 40% off, jumping up to Cubase Pro, which is a great deal. But the question is, I just bought the Pro update. Do I need the Elements installed before? Because the update is only about 400 megabytes. No, all you have to do is, you could, just when you go to the Steinberg download manager, just install the full program, and it will install the components that it needs to get you the full feature set. So there's obviously some shared components of content and, some of the groove agent sounds and synthesizers that won't need to be reinstalled again. So, but get the full one, and then, you may download more than you need, but, it's better to do that than to not have everything installed. But you don't have to keep the original elements installed. Okay. Okay, so question, I just purchased Groove Agent 5. Can I use Groove Agent 5 standalone for my bass and drum backing tracks for live performance? How do I make bass backing track? Thanks, Greg. You could definitely run, you could definitely run Cubase, Groove Agent in standalone mode. You could do that, but if you wanted to, have other tracks like bass, to play with it, it would probably make more sense to have, to have a DAW, and if you're doing a live thing, a lot of people will get Cubase elements and do the project in Cubase and take it out on a laptop or even Cubases, just so that, Cubases won't really like to run Groove Agent 5, so it's probably not a great choice, but you could run it standalone, but it probably makes more sense to do it within the DAW because you have a lot more control and you can just kind of hit play and you know how everything is going to work. So, so if you wanted to have like, bass tracking, like if you're a guitar player, singer, songwriter, guitar player, and you want bass and drums, it's probably the easiest way is to still go out with like a Cubase Elements, or if you get an audio interface like a Cubase AI or LE version, that would probably be the best way to go. Okay, so Steinberg working on session type editing similar to Ableton. I'm not that familiar with Ableton, but is that like the clip launching? I haven't heard of plans for that, but because we kind of, most of our users tend to, like the linear aspect of it. But I'm not that familiar with what this session type editing is in Ableton. Okay. What's the best way to insert bars or just a couple beats in the middle of a song without having to cut and drag everything to the right? Okay, so if we have, do you want to, add a measure or a couple beats in a particular project? We could do that quite easily using the range tool. So let's say I have this particular project. I'm just going to hold down Control Shift. And let's say, okay, I needed to insert that amount of time. So I'm going to select the range of time that I need to add. Go to the Edit menu to Range, and we'll just say Insert Silence. And that will just knock everything over to the right that was in that selected range. So if I do a smaller range, and again, you could, if you want to do it just on a couple of tracks, I could use my range selection tool, and I just needed to add space there. And again, just go to range, insert silence. It'll only do it on those selected tracks, or Control Shift, which will do globally, or Command Shift on Mac, and edit to range, insert silence. So that's an easy way where you don't have to cut and move all the parts and hope you didn't accidentally miss one or screw up. So, okay, let's go on. Okay, so it says, hi, I'm Tom from Slovenia. Good to have you on Hangout. I have a question. If I have a multi-synth VST open, like Halley and Sonic or so, then I open up another channel on another instrument, but different MIDI out, but I struggle with volume. Okay, so what you want to, if you're running like a multi-instrument, I think I understand what you mean, but if I am totally wrong. All right, so when you come here, you can say, I have this instrument and it's running, I'm running multiple sounds here. All right, so what a lot of people run into is now they have one output They have multiple they have multiple parts here, but they have one output into the audio engine. So this is kind of controlling everything. Now, if you have the MIDI tracks, you could do MIDI volume for that, but that may not be good if you wanted to do different effects. So probably what you want to do is to go over here to the mix, and if you click on the mix column, just come over here and activate different outputs for the different instruments. Then each of these will have their own volume control that you created. So that way, you could, have your volume control here. And then when you want to, do different aspects, you have all of your different channels that could be accessed directly there. So I would give that a shot. And I think that will probably solve the issue that you're running into for managing the volumes. Okay, so question, why does the chord pad in the lower zone kind of glitch? The pads always switch randomly. When I hover my mouse over a pad, it will select it and move the pad around crazy. So let's take a look. So, and I'll activate the project here. So it seems to be pretty, doesn't seem to be doing that on mine. One thing you could try, is, as we talked about before, to see if maybe it's a corrupt preference, but try to boot up with Alt Control Shift or Command Option Shift and try to temporarily disable the preferences and see if that behaves a little differently. Okay, question. When you open the media bay using F5, okay, is there any way to make bigger the left side where you see folders and files? I would like to make it bigger for a better view when previewing. I think that is going to be a fixed size. It could be depending on your monitor resolution. If you adjusted your monitor resolution, that could be bigger, but I don't know of a way to reconfigure the sizing of the folder structure here. And I think it's kind of optimized to make sure that you could see lots of different folders at once. But if you have like horrible vision like myself, I often describe my vision as Mr. Magoo vision, that, once you have that done, that, it may be, I can see where having that a little larger could be beneficial. Okay. So, I'm seeing just a lot of the same question repeated, like, 7 or 8 times. So I'll get to the question, like, when I can. And sometimes, if you keep asking over and over again, it just kind of makes everything a little longer in the Hangout. So asking a question, 10 times and then, it's the same question, if we could just kind of, try not to do that, that would be helpful. Just makes it easier to navigate the Hangout. Okay. Okay, question. Is it possible to select notes that don't start from the beginning of the bar and duplicate them to someplace? Okay, so is it possible to select notes that don't start from the beginning of the bar and duplicate them? No, same, please. Next bar with Control D. Okay, so So let's say I have something like this and we wanted to be able to, and it says we have a note that's maybe starting before the bar line, like these two notes. There could be a couple of different ways of doing this. One is if you go to the Edit in Place menu, you could use the range selection tool. So I could just select a range and duplicate the range of events. Sometimes, let me just see if I did that right. So if I wanted to duplicate a particular range, you could do that kind of within the in-place editor. You could also kind of do it. And we don't have a range tool in the within the main editor. I've been lobbying for it for a while. But if you do with it, and if you don't see the in-place editor, I think it's Control Shift I. Something, yeah. So hit Control or Command Shift I. And if you need to do kind of range editing like that, just grab your range selection tool. And like I say, I just wanted to duplicate that. And you could just duplicate a particular range. So that's one of the times where the edit in place, and again, it's Control Shift I or Command Shift I where you could do that. Okay. So I was just seeing a comment. Does he not read the text YouTube comments? Yeah, I'm going through the comments and reading them. So, but we have a lot of comments that come in before we could get to them. Okay, question: is it possible? Okay, so moving on. Okay, so it's just see comment: sustain pedal help, please. So if you I'm not sure what you need help with the sustain pedal. If you could specify, that'd be great. Okay. Another way of doing something like with the duplication that we did before, another method that you could do, and there's a preference to be aware of when we do this. So if you go to your preferences, we could choose under editing MIDI to split MIDI events. So right now, if I split this particular MIDI event here, and let's say I have that. So as soon as I split the MIDI event, wherever I cut, it would cut the note so that the notes that come beforehand will automatically be kind of split wherever I split the note. So those notes that were attached, you could do that and then duplicate the event, and that would also kind of exclude the notes that started before. Okay, how to undo, redo only in particular parts without affecting the changes in the project. So the edit history is going to be global, and that will be a linear undo history. So if I wanted to look at my history, we can't necessarily just say I only want to do undo changes in one particular aspect. We could do that within the direct offline processing allows you to do a non-linear undo history, but within the main project window for most edits, so we could just simply go through and and have your undo history. Okay. Okay, so it says, is there any other way to separate MIDI track besides dissolve part? I want to send from my Easy Drummer instrument track to a different track as aux bus, just like Pro Tools. So if you could tell me what you want to do. I'm not familiar with Pro Tools, and if you wanted to send, if you wanted to send the audio out, or if you wanted to, send the MIDI out. So if you could specify Tam, that'd be great. Okay. Okay, so I'm just seeing a question. Sustain pedal mutes instead of sustaining. Oh my God, please help. One of the things you could check is, depending upon your controller, that, there's two different types of polarity for the sustain pedal. So make sure that, and there's kind of a Yamaha polarity and a Roland. I think Roland and Chord use one polarity, Yamaha and Kawai use another. So it could be just that your sustain pedal, if many of them will have just a polarity switch on it, make sure that the polarity switch is set correctly to it. Cubase is capturing everything that's being sent from the controller, so it could be the wrong polarity for your MIDI controller. You may have to just switch that. Okay. Okay, just reading a question. When making a chord track with X further than the screen width and returning to input the chord in X, then pressing right arrow to next X at screen, and there's no scrolling, is there a preference to fix? All right, so let me recreate this. Okay. Okay, so let's see if I could recreate this. So it says, when making a chord track with X further than screen width and returning to input the chord in X, then pressing right arrow to next X. Okay, so let me just, if I hit the arrow to navigate between the two. Okay, so I'm hitting the left and right arrow. Okay, so I'm just seeing that there's no scrolling, but if I have this here, let's say this is my X, and then when I go to the next X, this is measure 5, and I go to measure 2, it allows me to navigate there, and then it shows it as being visible. But let me move it farther out and see what the behavior is. So I move this out a couple measures. So I have this one selected, then I hit to the right. That goes to measure 7. Then go back to 1. So it's navigating correctly by pressing the right. So it's not scrolling, but I'm not sure what a preference would allow you to do, because it's actually selecting the right one. So if I duplicated this and I want to navigate, and we'll just zoom out again. So hitting my left arrow, that jumps to measure 7, to measure 13, to measure 18, and that becomes the active one. So I'm not sure what scrolling would allow you to accomplish that. It's because it's navigating directly to the events, but make sure that you just have the event selected as opposed to any other events. If there's something else selected, that might throw off the left and right arrow behavior. Okay, so we have a question: how to stick two audio files together. Okay, so there's a couple. So sometimes people will want to do grouping of two audio files. Let's say I have this, where we could group these and these will stick together. If you wanted to bounce the selection of these two audio files, you could just go to render in place and go to your render settings. And you could also just, I think if I just have these two selected here, let me just select this, and I think there's just an option I was looking for here. So where you could mix down to one audio file. So if you just wanted to render those, then this is, and that could automatically mute those, and this would automatically just allow you to have both of those files kind of merged together. So if we wanted to play that, we could just have those two files merged. Okay, so I see a question. Will Cubase ever be syncable with Cubase? I haven't tried, a lot of, we can take the projects back and forth, but I haven't tried doing like a MIDI clock synchronization. And it could be, so, but I'm not sure if Cubases can sync, but you can obviously take your projects back and forth and migrate it from Cubases to Cubase. So okay, so I see in the project preferences window, what are the differences between equal power and other options? This is probably dealing with in the project setup for the panning law. So when we go to the stereo pan law, you could have different options, so that as you pan a source. So I'll just undo this and let's just solo one of these. So as we kind of play like this particular file, I'll just select and play this. Just ungroup these. All right, so if I have equal panning power law, when I go into my mixer and pan, there's not going to be any change in volume as we pan. But we know that if we add two different devices, if we double the volume, like two speakers, that we could have the panning law be, theoretically should be set to, minus 3 dB. So if we combine the left and right speakers together, we could do this. So let's say if I set this to minus 3 dB and hit OK. So now as I pan, you'll hear the volume drop from the center. So that's kind of what the panning law allows you to set how that's going to be controlled. So a lot of people will do, adjust the panning laws to get wider sounding mixes as you actually go through the different mixing. So it's a kind of a mix trick that a lot of people do. Okay. Okay. Question: if I have a VST2 plugin and one is a VST3 version, should I always use the VST3? Yes. So if you had the same plugin, just always go for the VST3. One, it's probably going to have more capabilities such as side chaining, but it could also by default not take CPU power when it's not processing audio. So generally the VST3 is a lot more robust and a lot more efficient and better stability. So always opt for the VST3 plugin. Okay. Okay, hi Greg. Question about track colors. Right click on channels. Used to show an option to color selected tracks in that color. I can't see this option anymore. So I think, if you wanted to color the tracks, there's a number of different ways, and it's changed a bit. So if I have these tracks selected, we could go to our color tool. And let's say if I have, this color selected, I could now, just come over here with the color tool. And let's say if I, had the events, just grab so if I wanted to take, the color tool here and say, I want these two tracks to be green, yellow, blue, whatever colors that I select. So I could do that. And we could also have colors that are going to be set on different tracks. So if I wanted to, let me unmute these. If I wanted these events, even though this color is kind of, magenta, I'm horrible with colors. And I wanted these particular events to be a different color, we could do that. So kind of, when you go to the color tool, you can now select your different color options here. So you could colorize the tracks, and you could do this, on the track level for individual tracks. So if you want to do that, or if you go to the mixer, you can change the track colors there as well by clicking in the lower corner of the mixer. Okay, is there a way I can use 32-bit plugins in Cubase 10.5 Pro? There are some bridging solutions. Check out JBridge, and that will allow you to run 32-bit plugins. Also, some people will host VST 32-bit plugins in VE Pro. But, be aware that as we do different bridging options, that could lead to system instability. All right, hang on a second. My son is knocking. All right, thanks for your patience. Movie 2 is queued up for my son, so we should have another hour and a half or so. So let's move on. So I think that makes sense with kind of the coloring. Okay. So just reading through different comments here. Thanks for all the great questions. Okay, so and this may be getting back to the Easy Drummer and sending it to aux track, so you could tweak just like you can on a MIDI track. So, if you have multiple outputs in the instrument, so probably what you want to do if you have let's say if I go to like my instrument track and I have, Groove Agent. It's kind of getting back to creating auxes. So, if I go to my Groove Agent here and I have, let's say, just a I'll just load up a kit here. And this could work differently within Easy Drummer. I haven't worked with it in forever, but once you go to the mixer, let's say if I'm playing back a pattern, I could come here and right now everything's going out of one stereo out, but I could say I want the kick to go out of output 2, the snare out of output 3, output 4 for the hi-hats, room out of output 5, and overhead out of output 6. And now these are all being kind of sent to different destinations. So it could really depend. So I think you probably just within Easy Drummer, you probably set the outputs. All right. So I'll go ahead and stop that. Let's move on to some more questions. Thanks for all the great questions from everyone. Okay. Question. Is the MIDX 8 still a useful interface for Cubase 10? I think it works up. I'm running it on my Windows 10 on Cubase 10.5. I've had it almost 20 years. I think it goes up to 10.8 or 10.9 maybe on the Mac. So, for a while it wasn't compatible with Windows 7 and later Mac operating systems. But there is a driver that was kind of redone by one of the developers in their free time. So I'm still using 2 MIDX 8s for my large MIDI rig, and they work flawlessly for me. So, but it may be limited on Mac OS. I'm not sure if Catalina would work, but maybe previous versions it might. Okay. Okay, so question from Scott. Can I add icons to loops and sounds in the side panel in the track page? These are kind of done by the factory. So if you come over here and you wanted to see kind of your own loops, these are kind of commercially done. So there isn't a way to assign a preset. And I think that maybe you had emailed for the last Hangout and we talked earlier about kind of deleting like two files in the media bay if your loops the icons weren't showing up correctly. So if we go back through the index, hopefully I'll have that later tonight or early tomorrow, you could find a particular files. Okay, so it says, and there's a comment, I still use 5 MIDX 8 interfaces without any issue. Cubase 10.5, amazing piece of hardware. All right, so someone else is running it too. Okay, so we see just repeated questions about your sustain pedal. So, and as people have mentioned, we commented here, but just, it's probably the wrong polarity for your controller. Okay. Okay. So question. Hi, Greg. Is it possible to audio warp 2 tracks simultaneously in a group edit mode? I have a stereo track, a process guitar, and a DI the same, both in sample editor, but only one edited at a time. Currently, we can't really do 2 tracks at the same time, but what a lot of people end up doing is doing the edits on one and choosing to do just an audio alignment on the other. So you can set the one track that's been edited as your reference, and then your target, and just do an align audio. And most people find that works very well for 2 different guitar parts. Okay. Okay, just going through comments, and we'll go ahead. I know we had people that had sent questions in. So let's go through some of those. And when people sent questions in, I had some time to prepare for projects, so I don't have to try to recreate them. So thank you. And again, if you want to send questions in advance, you could just send them to Club Cubase at steinberg.de. So let's go ahead and open up a quick project here. So we got a question from Rick Ballantyne. Says, this has been perplexing me for a while and it'd be sure speed up my production time. And he does a lot of great composition work. Say I'm doing a score that I want to pull up a combination of strings I made in a track preset, and what I would love to happen is that the instruments I need are all in contact and assigned outs to the mixer and to mixer settings, outputs, effects, buses, etc., or how I want them. Is there a way to save the whole enchilada? Instruments, assignments, buses, effects, sends in a way that they are modular pieces. Does that make sense? I don't have to recall the track preset, then go through all this and set it up with my mix parameters again. So let's say I have some, like, just a horrible composition here. And I have a couple of string parts. And these are all being routed to a reverb. And all into, let's say, a group here. So, and I wanted to be able to have these imported directly into another project, kind of with all of my settings. So if I come here and I have EQ, so let's say if I just select different channels and different volume levels, and effects and routing. So now what I want to do, if I wanted to have these go back, I'll select all 6 channels, go to the file menu, and then we could go to export selected tracks. And we could copy the media files or have the reference files. So I'll go ahead and choose to copy the media files. I'll say okay. And I'll just call this Rick, and we'll save it to my desktop. I'll save that. Okay, I'll just go to a new project. And as we kind of come directly over here, I'll just do an empty project. And at this point, so we exported tracks, selected tracks, and we import, it's a little goofy, it's called track archive. And I'll come over here. I say import the XML. I will choose to select all the files. If I don't want to import the media or automation, I could choose to exclude those on the import. I'll hit OK. And now all those different settings will automatically be carried over. So just get the... So there are different routing and instruments and our EQs I made. So everything could be just imported that way. So once again, select the tracks, go to your export to selected tracks and import to track archive. Okay, let's jump back. Okay, so we had a question that was kind of clarified later in the comments of the last Hangout. And the question was if we had quantized presets on another computer. So if we come over here and let's say I had a quantized preset that I made, how to transfer that over to another computer. And this is going to be stored into preferences. So if we wanted to go to your preference files, and we could now just kind of come directly over here. Let's say we'll go back to my Finder. And this will be stored in your RAM presets. So I will come over here and on the Mac, I'm just going to go hit the Alt key and this will take us into our library. And at this point, under the preferences, so we see our Cubase 10.5. We'll scroll down and you'll see presets. And there's this file here called RAM presets .xml. And that is where the your quantized presets are stored in the RAM presets. Okay. So going back, we had a question on how to merge multiple MIDI parts into one single part. So let's say if I look at these 3 MIDI parts here in the editor. So I select all 3 parts, and each part will have one note. So these will be our 3 separate parts, and I wanted to merge these all into one particular part. So I'm just going to drag it over top of each other. So now we have these 3 parts, but if I double click, you often just get the top layer. So if you grab the glue tool at this point and hold down the Alt or Option key, you could now join all 3 parts that are copied on top of each other onto one actual part. So when we go to look at it, we can see all 3 notes within the one part. So to merge events, you could copy the parts on top of each other, select the glue tool, and hold down the Alt or Option key and click, and then that will merge all the parts that are stacked on top of each other directly into one part. We also had a question about live transform. So I'll show it in this example here. And this is kind of a cool function of the chord pads, of the chord track. So let me revert this quickly. So let's say if your primary instrument isn't keyboards and you had a lot of, and you wanted to work kind of intelligently and come up with different parts, I'm going to, again, go to my project and say, let's go to create chords from my piano part here. And I'm going to just find a quick string part. So let's say if I come here, and I'm just going to play different notes. So I will double click here. And as we do this, I will kind of zoom in. And I will just kind of play different. I'm going to play the same chords over and over again. But I'm going to go to the chord pads here on the particular track. And I'm going to put this into live transform mode to chords. So I'm going to hit the same 3 notes, but it's going to look at the chord track itself here. And it's going to remap all of my chords to the chord track. So as I just kind of hit record, I'll just hit any 3 notes. It could be from a drum controller, drum pads, whatever. And it's transforming it. And now, as soon as I've actually recorded the part, you could just come in here and see that it is taken, what basic, I played the same 3 notes over and over again, but it has now automatically mapped it to the chords based upon the chord track here. So you can take any 3 notes and have it play and have it kind of automatically be the right chords for you. So that's what the live transform function does. Okay, we had a question regarding working with loop mash. And with loop mash, people wanted to take kind of the actual output of loop mash and have that in a particular file. So let's come over here. So I have and loop mash, if you haven't kind of played around with it, it's kind of a very hip way of, coming up with beats that are very creative. So let's say I just have one part here, and within this part, I just have one note that's triggering this different pattern of loops. And I could have different MIDI notes that would play, different loops. So if I come here and so if I wanted to take the output of what Loop Mash is generating and have that be kind of spit out as an audio loop, all I would have to do is select my one note here that is triggering all of those events going on in Loop Mash. And I'll just go to my render in place. So I'll just say, okay, let's just render it in place, and that will now automatically take that, and it's generated my audio file directly underneath. So if we wanted to just listen to that. So that one MIDI note, which is now muted, it was triggering all those different audio. So that one MIDI note just rendered it, and then we have our loop directly in the project. So we had another question that was sent out about doing different panning on individual MIDI notes. So like if we had notes here, and we wanted like this note to be panned like hard left, but this note hard right, this one hard left, hard right. And within the MIDI specification, until just recently this year, from 1982 to 2020, when we dealt with MIDI controllers, the MIDI controllers were going to be based on the channel only and not the individual notes. Now, Steinberg with version 6 came out with the VST 3.5 extension. So Hallian Sonic, Hallian Sonic SE, Retrolog, Pad Shop can all take advantage of this, where we could do what we call note expression. So if I wanted to just double click, I could select a note and we could choose whether we wanted volume or panning, but on a note by note basis. So this way, like if I had two different MIDI notes that were occurring at the same time, so where this note is held out and then we have this note come in, if I wanted to pan, this note would pan automatically to the current value. So you'd have one controller one controller lane of information for everything. But now I could just double click and draw in different panning options. So let's go ahead and take a quick listen to that. So you can do some very creative things where like the lower note will be just held, but in one channel, and the upper note will start and be panned in the opposite channel. So that would kind of give you an idea of how you can do that. And we'll see some of the specifications change for MIDI 2.0 to accommodate this. But it was really Steinberg that's been doing this for 10 years that really pushed the envelope. So that's how you could have individual panning within a single part on the same MIDI channel. But the instrument's going to have to support it. So MIDI 2.0 instruments, as they come out in the future, will be able to do that. But VST 3.5 instruments is really kind of already set the standard again. So another question is, when will we have instruments that support and work with the Rolly? And and just like we've done this note expression, individual expression on different controllers, there wasn't a real controller that was very, very suited for that. So, when we came out Cubase 10, we supported, what we call MPE. So when we have an MPE device, you could just kind of come over here. And we would say it's a note expression input device. And here we could map different parameters. So we could say, You're going to have the horizontal, the vertical, and pressure. So when you have a Rolly controller, it's a bit different than traditional MIDI controllers because you could play the note and move your finger up and down vertically or apply more pressure or move it left to right, and you could change the sound. So we could already have support for this for, a year and a half already. And you'll see that this is often called MIDI polyphonic expression, but when you go to different instruments, so once I go to an instrument here, such as Pad Shop, or when we go into Retrolog and we add an instrument track, that we will already have a whole bank of different synth sounds to take advantage of the MIDI polyphonic expression. So as soon as I come here, we just go into our MPE presets, and then those are all set up to work with the Rolly controller. So if you have one of those, we're kind of supporting this standard, and I think it was probably, inspiration for people to come up with alternate, more expressive MIDI controllers. Okay, so I saw a question that was sent in. It says, please fix complete control integration in Cubase. We don't do the integration for the complete controllers. That's done by Native Instruments. So, so you're probably best to contact them. But, we haven't done the integration. That's a feature that was brought to the market by Native Instruments. Okay, people had asked about a question was emailed in about how to kind of just drag to make a copy of a part easily. There's a couple of different ways. One is if you hold down the Alt key and go to the bottom, we could just drag across and make a copy like that. A lot of people miss that, so we also added it in the right-hand center. You'll see this little handle here. So if you grab that, you could just drag that out and make copies. Now, if we wanted to make a ghost copy, so let's say if I have these events set up here, I'll just move this back. So let's say if I hold down the Shift key and copy, we see this little icon in the upper right-hand corner of the parts. And that indicates that it's a shared copy. So just by holding down the Shift key and doing either the drag from the lower left-hand corner while holding down the Alt key, or Shift and dragging from the center, now if I just take these particular notes and adjust them down using the arrow keys, you'll see that all the parts that are shared will just reflect those changes as well. So any change I make in the master part will get reflected. And if you just come over here and edit the part, you could, turn that into a non-shared event as well. But those are two easy ways to kind of drag and duplicate parts. We had a question on one of my projects. I had kind of like the Strawberry Fields kind of organ sound on a track called Beatles or Stones, written by Vince Melamed. And someone was asking what preset that was. And that was just one of the Halion presets. So within Halion, I think this comes in Halion Sonic SE, is an instrument called Haliotron, which gives you, all the classic Mellotron samples. So if you're not familiar with what a mellotron was, it was actually kind of an early sampler that played back the tones. When you played the keyboard, it would play back the recordings from tape. So it was used obviously in a lot of Beatles records, Moody Blues, Led Zeppelin, a lot of, for a lot of people is the cheap way of having strings on your patch, on your track in the 70s without hiring an orchestra. So, but that's where that sound came from. There's a number of discussions. It was, different instruments and stuff like that. Okay. Let's see, going through some other questions that were sent in. Okay, it says I've started producing or for now messing around music in Cubase 10. However, I also like to stream or record my work so the chat can give me or maybe the client can give me options or help me if I need it. However, when I load up Cubase 10, the audio and the rest of my open software or programs stops working. Is there a way I can hear the sounds in Cubase 10 while also hearing everything else on my computer? So, depending on how you have things routed for the monitoring, if you have different speakers or if it's going into a mixer, both sources. But if we go to the studio setup, and at this point we could choose to, when you go to the VST audio system, there's an option here for release driver when application is in background. And that way you could generally use your audio interface at the same time as, and jump over and listen to it on a YouTube channel and jump back and hear it in Cubase. Now, there's probably a similar setting if you're on Windows and you may have to dig down deep, where you can have a release driver to other applications. So in every different built-in audio interface has a different file structure of where that's found. So you could do it in Cubase or you could do it directly, but make sure also that you hear it that you look for the settings in the Windows control panel driver. Okay, so a question. Hi, Greg. Can you explain in details when we need to use the record shift function in the studio setup? So in the studio setup, we see this little option for record shift. At times, you may run into different scenarios where if you're trying to record, let's say for a live concert, but you're getting a delay from the front of house console. So let's say, there's still a number of front of house consoles and you start using groups and stuff like that things could be out of time. So you may have a scenario where the signal being sent to you has latency that needs to be compensated for. It's pretty rare. But that's what this option is here, the record shift. So you could actually, pre-roll the sample. So as you record, the timestamps can be, set to the right area. So it's a way of compensating for latency that's outside of your Cubase or Nuendo recording environment. That Cubase or Nuendo can't control. So that's what the record shift is designed to accommodate. Okay, so we have a question. Is there... okay, just reading through more of the questions that were sent in. Can you save a MIDI clip separately as a MIDI file? Say you made a 4-bar MIDI loop and you want to save it for future use. So if we have our favorite MIDI loop of all time, so let's say it is that we love this particular MIDI loop here. And we wanted this, if it's being routed to a VST instrument, which is in most cases going to be how it is, you could choose to export as a MIDI loop. So, and then once you export it as a MIDI loop, you could give it a new name, you can give it a folder, and then I'll just call this April 17th. And now when you go to import MIDI loops, this would automatically carry over the sound. And you'd see in your MIDI loops area over here on the project. Just blanking. Let's see where it's maybe in user presets. It's in one of these. but you'd be able to actually see the different MIDI loops you could access directly from your media bay as well. Okay, it says, hi, Greg. For I.O. work, I need pre-roll only when record. Record on same track, voice talent. Here's 5 seconds. New overdub, record starts. After pressing stop, pre-roll should go off without switching key commands. Okay, so how to accomplish this? Okay, so let's come over here and we'll go to our pre-record. So what pre-roll is going to allow you to do is, and you could activate this from the transport. If you don't see it, just make sure that you have pre-roll and post-roll enabled. And this is the pre-roll here. And this will be kind of based on your actual, if we have our master time set to seconds, you could see the values here represented in seconds, etc. So what pre-roll is going to allow you to do is, as I wanted to hit record here, so let's say if I come over here and I'll activate the pre-roll. So it will now, when I go to hit record, you see that it will jump back in time. Now, what the question was, they wanted to have that turned off as soon as they hit record. So to do that, you could create a macro. So if we come over here and go to your key commands, I made a macro earlier for pre-roll in record. So, and this is assuming that we start with pre-roll disabled. And what I did is I made just a macro, and it's these 3 steps, and you could make it quite easily. So I just clicked on new macro. I called it pre-roll in record. You could name it whatever you want. And under transport, I found use pre-roll. I added that. I hit record, added that, and then turned on pre-roll again. So that activates pre-roll, hits record, and deactivates pre-roll. So now if I wanted to do the pre-roll record, I could just trigger it from a macro, and you could assign a keyboard shortcut for the macro. And I'll just say pre-roll and record. And let me just disable it first. So I made a horrible mistake I said I shouldn't do. So I'm going to disable it here and trigger the macro. So now the record will automatically kick in. So we'll say pre-roll in record, jumps back. And then when the pre-roll is done, now punches in. And now when I stop, we could just go directly back to where we started that recording. So once again, just make a macro and come right over here. And the settings that you want for that particular macro, sorry, my mouse is not cooperating today, are going to be enable the pre-record, to start recording, and then to disable the pre-record. But make sure that when you start that the pre-roll is disabled. Okay, we had a question sent in about how to set up a dual mono bus when working with drums. So let's say if I had a drum group and I wanted to have a dual mono bus. So I have my drums. So, excuse me. So to set this up, let's say I send this particular track to a group. And this is kind of a common question that we're getting now about setting this up for dual mono buses. So I'll go ahead and just stop this. And what I did is I sent it to a group, the outputs of Groove Agent. And I sent 2 different compressors. And if you go into the channel editing, at this point, we could just click on, I'm going to try changing my mouse surface. So on the inserts, you could go to routing. And now when you double click, you could pick exactly which channel is being processed in the routing area. So I could have one compressor that's routing my left channel and a different compressor that's processing the right channel. So that way, as we adjust the compression, I could just go to my inserts here. So we could look at one insert and look at the other insert with different levels of compression on the left and right channels. So if you need to process in dual mono, that's kind of an easy way of allowing you to do that. So again, just send it to two different inserts, and at that point, do the routing on the inserts page. Okay, we had a question. Is there a way to see the timeline in a minimalist size when in the window? So if you mean kind of like the overview window, like we see here, so in Cubase we could have the overview, which is like really helpful for being able to navigate. We can't really see that in the full screen mix view. So let's come here and let's say if I have this, but one thing that a lot of people miss is if you wanted to see where the time is, and I'm not sure what you mean by timeline, but you could also have time display. So if you go to the settings cogwheel, you could have your time display set here. So as we would hit play in a project, you could see the time advance here. So if that's the time that you wanted to see, you could do that just by going to the settings cogwheel, or if you don't want to see it, you can hide the time display from there, but it's not necessarily like a project overview. Okay, there's a question. Is there a way to view an audio and MIDI event together and edit one of it concurrently? Is available 2 MIDI events to edit simultaneously? All right, so let's take a look. So if I have a couple of different events, so let's say I have an audio and a MIDI event here, and I will just go ahead and duplicate this track. And I'll just kind of knock it up an octave here. Okay, so if I wanted to see multiple events, I could select my events here and just launch my MIDI editor. And then I could see both events, and you could just simply click on one of them, and that would kind of pick which part is active. So you could do that quite easily. If you wanted to group these together, which a lot of people ask me about, so I wanted to take all these and just hit Control or Command G, and you could group the events like so that they always will stick together. Some people will also, want to see like the audio part, directly above here and see the MIDI part. So if you zoom in, if you click on this icon in the lower zone editor, you could zoom in and see both of them simultaneously kind of together. So you could do that quite easily that way. So those are some ways to do, and once they're grouped together, you could cut, on the main project window, erase different components if you wanted to. So if you come here and while they're grouped, let's just cut, all these events and, and now erase different components. So there's some different ways of editing things together. Okay, so we had a question: how to search for odd time signatures or loops in Media Bay. Okay, so if we have our Media Bay over to the right hand side, I can say, let's look at for all of my different drum loops. At the top, we see different attributes. So we have like category, subcategory, style, etc. So one of the categories here, if we click, we could go to musical, and then let's take a look under signature. So at this point, I could say, show me every loop that is in 6/8, or show me every loop that's in 3/4. So at that point, you could navigate and find different time signature loops. So again, kind of just once you go to the attributes inspector here, just make sure that we have this and look under musical, and you have all these different search parameters. But you could say, I want to go to musical and choose time signature. Okay, it says, I'm new to Cubase. Is there a way to audio mix down until the effect tail end? For example, if I have a delay, do I need to put the markers very long enough, or is it any way for Cubase finds the effects tail end? So when you do the export audio mix down, it's going to be based upon the left and right locators. So I know some people that will take this and you say, okay, I want, if I had a reverb, if this is the length of my song and all the parts in my project, but I had a reverb that was extending over, you would just need to listen to where the reverb or delay was extending and say, okay, it ends right here. And now you could just move your, we'll take snap off and you could just move your left and right locator, based on a cursor. So just listen to it and manually adjust the right locator. But Cubase uses the left and right locators so to determine the length of the export. Okay, it says, hi, Greg. To review my question, this is a question from last Hangout that I didn't understand. So it says, can Aftertouch be used to automate EQ plugins for audio? So if we go, and my controller that I have doesn't transmit Aftertouch, but I think if we go to your studio menu to studio setup, that we could now come over here, let's add a generic remote. So we say we want fader 1. So basically we set what type of MIDI message we want and what we want it to control. And so we can say fader 1, I want it set to Aftertouch. We can set the MIDI channel, make sure you have the correct MIDI input and output ports. And at this point I could say, let's go to fader 1. We want this Aftertouch message to go to your VST mixer, and we could select a channel, and we could say like EQ3 frequency. And now when you hit Aftertouch, that could adjust the EQ3 frequency on that particular channel. So give that a try. And again, I don't have a controller currently hooked up that will actually allow me to spit out Aftertouch to try. But I think you could do it through that or any other MIDI controller as well. So if you wanted to have a knob on your controller, be able to adjust a cue or different functions, you could do that as well. So we had a question: do you have in development in 3D audio plugins, Sony 3D audio release? One of the things that we do already feature in Cubase is ambisonic plugins. So if you're doing more 3-dimensional and spherical based processing, we could add audio tracks. And as you add an audio track, you could choose your audio, you could say your configuration. So you can have mono, stereo, up to 5.1, but you could also have first, second, and third order ambisonics. So once we have that set up, and if you wanted to do, and if you have audio that's recorded in ambisonics, we could now kind of come over here, and if you have, we could open up like a VST multi-panner, and at this point you could choose to look at it from the top view, or if you wanted the sound to kind of spin around your head, you could do that. So you could do kind of spherical 3-dimensional audio using ambisonics for that. So so you can play around with that, and that's what most people are using kind of for 3D audio stuff. Okay. So let's go on to some more questions. Thanks everyone for the wonderful questions. Okay, let's go back to some more questions that were sent in. Okay, what is the official way to change tempo of a song that doesn't affect audio, such as a vocal track? I'm using Cubase 10, and when I change tempo, the vocals sound off. So when you're doing that, just make sure that, you know, the audio tracks won't change with tempo if they're not set to musical mode. So if I take these tracks and if I have them in musical mode and I slow down and speed up, those tracks are going to kind of match. But if I take them out of musical mode and adjust the tempo, we can see that those won't be affected. So just select the tracks here and just make sure, you know, if you don't want it to change with timing, just make sure that the selected tracks from the info line are set to music, you know, or not set to musical mode. If you want it to automatically change with the tempo, put it into musical mode. Okay, going on to some more questions. Okay. Okay. Just reading through comments. Thanks again for all the wonderful questions. I hope everyone's learning a tip or trick. Okay. Okay, just reading through different comments. There's always these great discussions I don't get to participate in the comments because I'm always busy answering the questions. Okay. Okay, so I'm just seeing a comment. Hey, I just upgraded to Pro 10, 10.5, and it's crashing on updating. Just make sure that it's actually, you know, it's probably a third-party plugin. So try to start in the mode without having the third-party plugins enabled. So you can try that. All right, my timeline got way ahead of me. Let me just jump back. Okay, so just going through different comments here. Give me a second. Okay, just reading through. Okay, so it says, Greg, can you use Groove Agent SE5 with third-party libraries to create beats and grooves? There are a number of different libraries. You know, once you have you know, Groove Agent can, one of the interesting things with Groove Agent is that you could try. So, you know, you could actually, Groove Agent as it plays, you know, you can have a MIDI track. So if you want to use it with third-party libraries, if the notes are kind of matching up, you could have a MIDI track here and have Groove Agent as its input. So once you do that, so if you wanted to record directly in or have the input of Groove Agent, the patterns being sent to another device, you could just load up a different device and have Groove Agent automatically spit the MIDI data out as if you played it, and it could be redirected to any other drum library as well. So if you want to use Groove Agent patterns with third-party libraries, you could do that as well. Okay, so question, how to add auto-tune program to Cubase LEAI Elements 10. Can you explain a simple idea about adding to the chorus to a song, or maybe a chorus? So, if you have the plugin installed, you could just run it as an insert. So any of the audio tracks, you can just come and run auto-tune as directly as an insert. It'll just show up there. One other plugin, I'm not sure if this comes with AI LE, but it might come with Elements, is the pitch correct plugin. So, and here you could just kind of set a particular scale. So you can say, okay, I just want to have it, by the chord track, or I want an external MIDI scale. And, so you could actually, just choose particular scales. I want it to be, C, or E major, and you could have the pitch automatically kind of comply. So check to see if you have the pitch correct plugin. And, you may not have to use any third-party solutions. Okay. Okay, so just seeing a comment. Hello, great people from Steinberg. Awesome products. Thanks for the discount on upgrading to Pro. You are awesome. I will finally jump from Elements to Pro. Ooh, yeah. Thanks, guys. Great. Yeah, take advantage of the ability of some of the discounts that are going on, because we want to make sure people are getting kind of the same, getting some great functionality. Okay. Okay, so just seeing, I am, please show how to make orchestral template design with Vienna Sample Pro. I don't have Vienna, so I'm probably not really, I don't really have the ability to show that. Okay. Okay, we have a question. Is it possible to select notes that don't? Okay, so we answered that one. Okay. Okay, reading through comments. Okay, so how to use old version of processing audio like stretch and undo, redo fast. So if you wanted to, I know that some of the processing has changed a little bit in newer versions, but the functionality is the same. So if you want to go to your audio to processes, here you could just say, I want to do time stretching, and then, you could just simply, take any of the different processes that you'd want to, hear, and be able to, to do different processes. Okay. Okay, just reading through. Okay, just lots of other people helping out other people, and sometimes people just asking the same questions again and again. Okay, just going through. Okay, going through comments, and we'll be wrapping up soon. Okay, says thank you for the hangout. When I play the chord pad to trigger chords on the chord track, I also get Groove Agent SE5 pads triggered. What am I doing wrong? You probably just have, the chord pads. Think of it as like a software MIDI controller, and you probably just have, not just the chord pad. So let's say if I have, these two sounds, record enabled, and I go to my chord pads. So, if you have, you probably just have this actually record enabled. So it's probably just sending it to both devices. So check just to make sure. Okay, can I import my own arpeggiated chord MIDI into chord pads when in pattern player mode? There's an import MIDI. So yeah, you can kind of take any pattern that you have, and let's see if I could find this. I know it's moved recently, but let's say that's my lovely arpeggio, and so once we go over here, but you do have the ability of just dragging and dropping a chord pad as the player. I'm just forgetting where it was moved to. Okay, so maybe we go to our pad layout. But there is a way to just drag and drop your own patterns into there. So I'll see if I can find the answer and have it for the next hangout. Okay, question. What's the difference between Very Audio 2 and 3? Very Audio 3 came out with version 10, so it added formant control. It added kind of a much more kind of like smart tool, so you didn't have to constantly toggle between like the edit mode and segment mode in previous versions. You could also adjust volume, and you have a lot more smart control, so it's been much easier to kind of navigate. Okay. Sorry, my voice is getting a little rough after talking for 3 hours straight. Okay. Okay, just saying thanks for all the hangouts. Glad we hope that people are learning stuff. Okay. Okay, here's an interesting question. What's my request for the next release of Cubase? I've been trying to kind of get a lyric track in for a while, so I think that would be really useful. But, I still have to do more lobbying for it, I think. Okay, so it says, can you copy signal chain in offline processing to another event or track? Okay, so if you find yourself kind of always using similar things, like let's say, okay, I wanted this to go through a magneto with these settings, and I think that you could just there's a way to, so if once you have that kind of set up, you could just drag in different plugins. So if you say, okay, I do lots of dialogue editing and I need to have a de-esser for, female artist, for a female voiceover, I could just take these and drag them in here. So this way you could have kind of like your go-to, and you could have different banks. You could also import effects chain presets. And if you have like different inserts, so let's say if I have like an insert, like a chain of different plugins, and I use this all the time for drums or piano or something consistently. You could go to the inserts on the mix console here. And let me just find my channel where I had all the... So if I wanted to just drag these particular inserts over, I could just add like a whole chain of inserts, and then at that point just bypass the inserts. So those are some easy ways to kind of have, you know, signal chains copied. Okay. Okay, we'll see if there's one more question, and then we'll go ahead and wrap up. I hope everyone's learned a couple of things. We'll try to have the index done in the next day or so. Okay. Okay, so I see a question. I have Cubase AI. I want to make upgrade to Cubase 10.5 Pro. How much should be paying for this? It varies. You know, there's a current promotion going on. And I'm not sure what country you live in. So if you just go to the Steinberg webpage, go to steinberg.net, you'll see a 40% discount, I think. And you could take advantage of that, but I'm not sure what country you're in. But you could see based on your country what the pricing is. But there's currently a promotion going on that's a great deal. Okay, like NI have their Contact keyboard, a Yamaha fully weighted keyboard controller that integrates into Steinberg recording programming software. Possible anywhere in the future. Yamaha and Steinberg, we've been trying to get a controller for a long time, so we keep trying. Okay. Okay, we'll try one more question. We'll see if this is a good one. All right. Can you remind me about the MIDI setting to add notes to an existing MIDI part? Is now adding a new part every punch, and I have to glue them. Set to merge now in MIDI menu. This is from Dave Glick. Good to see you, Dave. Miss seeing you at the Club Cubase DC meetings. So if you want to see this, you'll see in the bottom here the MIDI record modes. So you could just say, if you're in linear and cycled record mode, just click on merge. And then that way it won't create new parts. So just go to the bottom left-hand corner. You can see MIDI record modes and choose merge. And you could also see it from your transport, MIDI record modes. I think it defaults to new parts and it keeps stacking. So probably the default behavior should be set to merge, but do that. And hope you and your family are doing well, Dave. All right. Okay. Okay, so it says, do you know any way when you drop in a MIDI track in replace overwrite mode that earlier MIDI than when you dropped it in doesn't get deleted? Been bugging me for years. You know, you may want to try these modes as well. So let me just see if I could recreate that. Okay, so let me just so we drop a MIDI part in replace overwrite mode to earlier MIDI, then gets dropped in, doesn't get deleted. So you could try under edit, just out of curiosity. I want to say it might be under preferences. Let's see, editing. Delete overlaps, maybe. Let's see if this does it. So, yeah. So just come over to your preferences, see if this does it for you. Under editing, make sure delete overlaps is checked. And now, as soon as I drag this on top, it doesn't merge, but it just deletes what's underneath. So try setting that as a preference. Okay. Okay, with that, we've gone about 3 hours and 20 minutes. I'm going to go ahead and wrap up. I'll try to catch some of the questions that we didn't get to. I'm sorry that we couldn't get to every single question. So, but we try to get through all the questions as succinctly and as complete as possible. If you like the Hangout and if you learned a tip or trick, please feel free to subscribe to the channel and give it a thumbs up. While we're kind of in this stay home era, we're trying to do these Hangouts like twice a week. So we're trying to do them on Tuesday and Tuesday and Friday, starting at 1 p.m. U.S. Eastern. If you subscribe to the channel, you can get notified of them. If you have questions that you want to submit in advance, please feel free to send them to clubcubase@steinberg.de. So, it could be helpful for me if I had to create kind of a file to demonstrate to expedite the time, to make it a little easier. So I'm not just kind of creating stuff on the fly. That's always helpful. And, take advantage of some of the different promotions that are going on. There's the Stay Home Elements collection. So for 60 days, you could try out Cubase Elements, Dorico Elements for notation, Wavelab Elements for mastering, and the Absolute Collection, which is a wonderful suite of virtual instruments with like Halion Symphonic Orchestra. Also getting into, Groove Agent 5 and Halion and Retrolog and Pad Shop 2. So, a wonderful suite of instruments. There's also the VST Connect Pro is 50% off. I think that promotion just started today. And look for upgrading from, Cubase Elements or AI, LE, I think, and Cubase Artist to the Pro version. I think that's 40% off. So take advantage of some of those great discounts. We hope that everyone is staying safe and healthy and is able to come up with some great music while they're maybe staying home. And we'll try to make sure that you're getting the most out of your software. Thank you so much for for participating in a Hangout. It's a thrill to see people from all over the world. And please let us know if there's any questions that you have, and we'll see you next time. We hope that everyone has a wonderful weekend, and thanks for attending the Hangout.